In Exodus chapter 20, verse number 12, we're going to look at commandment number 5. Notice one of the wonderful things that God gave us was a mother and a father.
Amen.
It's been sad to me for people who have told me, I've never met my dad. Very few people have never met their mom. But a lot of folks have never met their dad. I remember I was 12 years old when I had one of the boys in my class. His dad and mom were going to get a divorce. And he said, so my dad moved out. I started to cry. I'd never heard of a mom and dad who didn't live together. It was heartbreaking to me. What do you mean your dad's not going to live at home with you anymore? I couldn't even fathom that. It's heartbreaking, and yet today, my wife will tell you from the classroom that she was in, very few of the children grow up in an intact, complete family anymore. So many children today, they've got half this, half that, step this. It's got to be so confusing. So this commandment here, verse 12, honor thy father and thy mother. Honor thy father and thy mother. What does the word honor mean to you? I see it as this one big concept that we are to grasp, that we are to give them reverence and respect.
Amen.
Amen. Sometimes it's easy to get upset with a parent. Don't you think?
Yeah.
You ever been times a little edgy with your folks? I want to read a few things to you. We're going to jump back into this verse. These are some cute little things that I found. It says, my mother taught me logic. She said, if you fall off that swing and break your neck, you can't go to the store with me. Sometimes moms make these wild connections, okay?
Yes.
If everyone else jumped off a cliff, would you? I heard that a few times. And for us, it was, we live by the Great Lakes. If everyone else jumped in the lake, would you? All right. My mother taught me about medicine. If you don't stop crossing your eyes, they're going to get frozen that way. Oh, boy. My mother taught me to think ahead. If you don't pass your spelling test, you're never going to get a good job. My mother taught me to meet a challenge. What were you thinking? Then you picture yourself starting to respond. She said, don't talk back to me. All right. My mother taught me humor. When the lawnmower cuts your toes off, don't come running to me. All right. My mother taught me about genetics. You're just like your father. How about this one? My mother taught me about my roots. Were you born in a barn? You might have read about these that moms might say sometimes. My mom taught me about wisdom as you age. When you get to be my age, you'll understand. Or I'll explain it to you when you get older. Another one, my mom taught me about anticipation. Wait till your father gets home. Heard that a few times. My mom taught me about receiving. You are going to get it when you get home. And the final one of those. My mother taught me about justice. One day you're going to have kids, and I hope they turn out just like you. Oh, that'll make mom happy, won't it? Exodus chapter 20. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Sometimes when we find ourselves getting into a hardened heart toward a parent, I want you to realize that the effect is it can shorten our life. Health issues. Come on now.
You're right.
I know some close people that because of the way they were parented, at a young age, they ended up on high blood pressure medicine. Just so much internal stress in their life. Come on.
Amen.
It's a sad truth.
Yes, it is.
You know, it's just like the church you go to. I feel sorry for some people because of the church they got born again in. You think that person's going to become a dysfunctional Christian. Because they're around a bunch of people that just aren't stable. A stable Christian environment is so essential for us.
Amen.
And we need to have respect for mom and for dad.
Amen.
I was telling a pastor friend of mine that worked for us, we went to Bible school together. Then when we moved back to Michigan, he ended up moving up to us to move up to the city of Alpena, Michigan, pastor the church that we had there. And we were talking about our growing up. He got saved at about age 19, and then shortly afterward, he moved to Oklahoma, and that's how we met at Bible school. He was from the Detroit area. So he's telling me about the way he was raised. I said, well, you know, my mom and dad are still together. That was at that time that we were talking. And I said, yeah, when I went through my teenage rebellion time, my mom said I couldn't grow a mustache. So on my 18th birthday, I grew a mustache. And you notice, it's still here all these years later. That was my teenage rebellion. His mom said I couldn't, so I did. Amen. He said, oh, you must have been such a difficult child. Well, I was the firstborn, so I was the perfect child. Honor. Staying respectful toward our parents is so essential.
Yes, amen.
Because if we don't model respect toward our parents, then our children are going to begin to display disrespect toward us. Now, we live in a day when disrespect for people that are our parents or our grandparents, these children are raised with people like Homer Simpson, and I don't know all the modern people.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that the kids know everything and mom and dad are just doofuses.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Mom and dad don't know nothing. We're going to teach them. We're going to do what we want to do.
Amen.
This is the age that children are growing up in today. Unthankful.
Yes, sir.
Come on.
Amen.
Unholy.
Amen.
Without natural affection.
Absolutely.
This is the day that we live in, and our public school system helps to just push these kids.
Oh, yeah.
I can remember when I used to drive school bus, kids would say, if their mom and dad did something, they were just going to call 911. Well, these kids don't know what kind of repercussions is going to happen.
Yeah.
You want to get yanked out of the house,
Yes.
come on now, get DFACs involved.
Amen.
You call on your parents over something that you got a little upset on today because, you know, you couldn't have an extra slice of pizza or whatever it was they got mad about. Couldn't go out and play. Now kids don't do that anymore. Right? Wouldn't let me watch my video game, play my video game.
You're right.
Amen. I've heard of parents having their son's girlfriend come and spend the night with them. Come on now. What kind of parenting is this?
Amen.
Oh, I want my kid to be my friend. I just want to be a friend. No, you are called to be their parent.
Amen.
Amen. You are called to be instructor. Your kid isn't always going to keep you on a pedestal. Amen. You would want them to. When you were raising your children, didn't you look at your children and just wish they would never grow up, that they would just stay young and tender and innocent for all their life. Because you're raising them really to want you in their life, but to not be dependent on you. That you are handing them off into adulthood, into responsibility. Come on now. You know, in my 61 years of life, after I left home, I've never asked my dad for any money. Or my mom. Never did. Now, there could be emergencies that happen. But my goodness, I want them to look at me and say, you know, he's doing a good job. I'm proud of them. They have become independent, and yet we don't want to kick mom and dad out of our life for anything. How many have lost their parents? Doesn't that leave a vacancy in your heart?
I have a family of 10, I lost one living.
Only one left. Wouldn't you just love to have had some more siblings? Now let's jump back in Exodus to chapter number 1. I want to read about 4 verses over here, then we're going to jump into chapter 2. I want to look at Moses' mother. We're going to read verse 15 through 17 and then jump into verse number 22. The king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other was Puah, and he said to them, why? Sorry, these new bifocals are not lining up good here. Why, when you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then you shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. Now skip over to verse 22. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. Now go over to chapter 2, starting in verse 1. And there went a man out of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son, and when she saw him, she saw that he was a goodly child. I want you to see that moms begin to see things in their children from the time that they're born. For those of us that have had children, you know you fall in love with that baby, don't you? Yeah. Before you ever get to hold them. And mommies even more so. Mommies get to experience that baby kicking and prodding and squeezing your bladder and all that good stuff. Right. And mamas build a connection with that baby before the baby even arrives. But dads, we're falling in love with that child as mama's belly's getting bigger. And it's like you thought she was beautiful when you married her, and now that she's got that baby on the inside of her, she's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. There's just something so precious about life. And when Moses was born, she looked at him and she saw something in him. She saw he was a good child. She saw that there was a future in him. She had no idea he was going to be heir to the throne of Egypt. She had no idea that God was going to use him 80 years later as a deliverer. No idea, but mama saw something in him. You see something in your kids, don't you? You remember that when they were little, you started to see gifts and talents and abilities in them. My son Matthew, he's got so many musical talents, which my brother Mark that was here with my dad. In a lot of ways, he's just like him. They both play the piano, the drums, the bass, did I say the guitar? I taught Matthew. I took 8 years of guitar lessons to become average. I taught Matthew what I knew, and in 3 months, all of a sudden, I mean, he has just taken off. He's playing chords and writing songs, and he started to lead worship for us. Knew he felt a call and a gifting of music upon him. And I was just in awe of all of these musical gifts that I had to work to become average. And they're just coming to him. It's just so beautiful. You start to see things in your kids. And she knew she saw something in him, and it wasn't a grave. Boy, I hate it when I hear people say things to their kids. You ever walk through Walmart and you hear people using every curse word that you know against their little kids? What kind of parenting is that? My wife with these 4- and 5-year-old kids in the daycare or the preschool. The things that these kids say. Unbelievable. I remember the first time I heard somebody use profanity, I was 13. And I didn't know what the boy said that was sitting next to me there in the geometry class. Excuse me, not geometry. I failed that. Well, close. This was in geography. Sitting there. I don't know what he said, but I knew the way he said it. That's not a good word. Yeah. I didn't even know what it was. I just lived in that shelter that my mom and dad kept me in to protect me, to keep me in a state of innocence. That's a good place for a kid to be. Now it says here, when she, verse 3, could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes and daubed it with slime and pitch and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. Now you can just picture Mama right here. She's probably weeping. Do I let them drown my son? Or do I take a chance? And maybe God can work a miracle to save my boy's life. She'd been hiding him already. You know, mamas pray for their kids. And I'm going to say a lot more than dads. There's something about moms that never quit praying for their children. You still pray for your 2 sons, Sister Mildred? She didn't hear me. No. Oh, I said, do you still pray for your adult sons? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And don't you cherish that, Brother Marty?
Oh, absolutely.
There's something precious. There is a spiritual connection, knowing that someone on this planet is praying for you.
Oh, yes. There's nothing else.
And you know that this mama was putting this baby in this basket and getting ready to trust him to God. She knew that if the Lord didn't protect him, death was his destiny. And I bet she got big sis to keep an eye out. And we know Miriam, don't we? Yeah. We know that she was part of Moses' entourage, we would say. She even challenged Moses a time or two, and it cost her some. Amen. When she challenged his authority more than 80 years later. So here, she puts Moses in this basket and lets it start to float down the Nile River. Where's it floating to? Pharaoh's house.
Oh, yes.
Now, do you think the river was just flowing that way? Or do you think she might have pushed it? We don't know. But Big Sis is following that basket. And Pharaoh's daughter was out bathing. You know, that's the way they did it back then. And she had her women that were kind of helping to guard her and all of these things. But she heard the baby crying. She saw the baby. She sent for the baby to be brought to her. She knew that it was one of the Hebrew children. That's what the Bible tells us. She knew it when she looked at it. Remember, the Egyptians are in the northest part, I can't get that word out, the most northern part of Africa. They are darker skinned than the Hebrews would have been. And so when she saw this baby, she immediately knew this as a Hebrew child, and she had compassion on him because he was crying. And Moses' sister said, I can find somebody to nurse this child for you. What a miracle this is. Because remember, the Pharaoh's daughter knows that there was a command that every male child was supposed to be killed. And what's the Lord doing? Bringing that baby boy right into Pharaoh's house. What a miracle this is. So now Moses' mother is going to get paid by Pharaoh to take care of his new grandson. You know, when we were expecting Matthew, our firstborn, my mom has always been very protective of her age. She still won't tell you how old she is. You had to do the math. So it was a mystery and a game for us to always try and figure out how old Mom was. With my kids, the same thing happened. They wanted to know how old Grandma was more than anything. It was, you know, my dad wasn't embarrassed about his age, but my mom just always wanted to protect it. I went from being her son to becoming her brother. Then I became her big brother. But when we were expecting Matthew, she said, I finally decided what the baby's going to be able to call me. What is that, Mom? My mom's a little sarcastic. A lot sarcastic. She said, we're going to let him call me Aunt Pat. Aunt Pat. Whatever, Mom. But when Matthew was born and we carried him out of the delivery room, first things that came out of her mouth, come to Grandma. You think Pharaoh, who gave a command that these children ought to be killed, when his daughter said, he belongs to me, Dad. Do you think that Pharaoh didn't fall in love with him? You know he did. He was in Pharaoh's house for up to 40 years when he killed one of the Egyptians who killed a Hebrew child that was a slave before he had to run, because now he's gone from being in favor with Pharaoh and an heir to being the leader of Egypt. Remember, the Lord told him, in his heart he knew that I'm going to be a deliverer of these people, but I'm sure he thought it was going to be through political means. That he'll just become Pharaoh when the Pharaoh dies, and then I'll just declare all the slaves are free. But the Lord didn't work it out that way. He ended up on the backside of the desert, didn't he? And for 40 years he was a shepherd. For 40 years. And then that's when he had that burning bush experience. At the age of 80, his ministry started. This is when the call was getting ready to come to pass, and he led the children of Israel for 40 years. Do you remember his nurturing came from his mama, who got paid? Boy, don't you think those other women were jealous of that?
Yes.
Don't you think, how did you get so lucky? What did you do? I just trusted the Lord. Boy, there are circumstances that come. Boy, like I said, you could just imagine the pain that was in her heart to trusting to the river or trusting to those that were commanded to kill him because she couldn't hide him anymore. She decided to trust God. There are things that happen in our life that all we can do is trust the Lord.
Amen.
Trust the Lord. Moses' connection to his mother. We don't see that Dad was even involved in making that basket, helping to put him in the water. This is something Mom did. This is something, don't moms have that wantingness in them to protect their children? Moms will go to any length to protect their kids.
Amen.
No matter how old they get to be. So much. This put Moses on a path. Even though he was in Egypt, even though he was in the Pharaoh's house, even though he probably received the best Egyptian education that was available at the time, he still knew God. His mother had a lasting impression upon his life. I'll say something once in a while. I say, there goes my mom's voice in the back of my head. And my wife will say, you haven't lived with your mom for 40 years. I said, I know it, but I still hear her voice. Amen. Amen. Moms, don't you want your kids to still hear your voice in the back of their head? Amen. Because you help to build guardrails around their life to protect them. Amen. And I think we see something so special here about the faith that Moses' mother illustrated for us. That even in the most dark situation, I have to trust the Lord.
Amen.
I have to protect my child. I would rather turn him to the river and let the Lord have his way than turn him over to the people that said they would put him in the river and drown them. Same river, different outcome.
Amen.
Come on. You watch children that grew up in the same house. One turned out walking the straight and the other straight and narrow, and the other one struggles. Made some poor decisions. Went against mom and dad's guidance. Paying the price for it. But there's still hope.
Amen.
We never quit praying for our little ones, do we? Even though they grow up and give us more little ones. We still love them. Protect them. Well, I had about 4 more women to talk about, but we're not going to get to them. Amen. Aren't you glad we didn't talk about the whore of Babylon today? Amen. There's a lot of different kinds of women that the Bible talks about. And from each of you that I've got to know and to care for, I see a lot of women that have set their lives in a direction to be Proverbs 31 women. That the men in your life, not just husbands, but sons and offspring, that their heart can safely trust you. You know, if you tell them something in confidence, it ain't going to the gossip circle. You know that there is a protection around you, that if I share something, I know Mom's going to pray for me. If nothing else, there's one person on this planet that's praying for me. That's good news.
Yeah.
Amen.
That's special to us. That's important to us. I'm thankful to know that I came from a godly heritage. Amen. My dad shared some of that when he was here just a few weeks ago. How precious it is to know. He said that there were times he'd get sent to bed, but he'd hear Mom in there by the old, what they used to call the potbelly stove, sitting out there in Middlesboro, Kentucky. He'd hear her out there calling out every child's name in that family. As they would be in bed, they could hear Mom praying for them nearly every night, calling their names out. God, please don't let any of my children go to hell. Help them all to know you at an early age, to walk with you all of their days, to honor you, to believe in you, to expect you to move in their life. Moms are precious. Moms are necessary. I got mad at my mom a few times. No lying about that. Amen. My mom's not perfect. Was yours? No. But you know that in spite of everything, yet unconditional love.